Hey, and welcome to episode 7 of Crippled with Anxiety. I'm Will,
I'm Danny.
and thank you for your continued listening. First up, an apology. For those of you who have been regular listeners, you will have seen that we haven't had an episode out for a while. Obviously, we've been trying to do an episode a week, but, such is life, and such are our medical conditions that we've fallen a bit by the wayside. So sorry about that. So today's episode, we're going to talk about grief and loss. So something that me and Daddy have been talking about doing an episode about this for a while now. But we appreciate as well that it's probably going to be quite a heavy episode in terms of its tone. But we hope that you'll push through and listen, because, this is something that everybody goes through at one point or another. So we hope that we're able to put some views across that are helpful for you, and know that others are going through it at the same time. So, Danny, we talked about doing this episode mainly because of your, well, let's be frank, absolutely shitty year. Last year. So why don't you tell us what transpired last year for you?
Yeah, I mean, it probably extends a little bit past that year. It was a rough sort of 18-month period. So we lost my grandma during COVID. She passed away. She didn't go missing. But my mum was working in the hospital at the time, so she was able to still be with her and be there for that passing. But we never got to see her at that time, because it was when you were allowed into hospitals and stuff. So I've been through a grief where you've kind of lost someone that you weren't able to actually say goodbye to at the end, and that becomes a little bit more apparent in the next few stories as well. So that happened, and then my mum got COVID and started to be really ill, and she got an autoimmune condition, and we thought that was sort of under control. It came to Christmas 2022, and my granddad, so we'd not really lost anyone, we're quite a small family. My granddad came down for Christmas Day. I drove back on the 27th of December, got a call from my uncle who lived with my granddad, that I'd missed, and he was shouting "Dad, Dad" on this voicemail in the background while he was ringing me. I didn't know what was going on. I was back in Leeds. My dad managed to get down there, and my granddad had passed away 2 days after Christmas. So you've just gone through a great family event, and you've seen these people, and then all of a sudden someone's not there. You've got out of a car in another city, and you've lost another person. And my mum was dealing with that stuff, but in January, the autoimmune condition started to get really, really bad. She was going through all sorts of different issues as well. She got osteoporosis, so her bones were really weak. She was breaking bones all the time. She had a few cancer scares. She had loads of sort of tests on her skin and her tongue. There was like a hole in. I think, well, we've talked in previous episodes that you've been through biopsies for that as well. Luckily, it came back and that was all right. But there was all these signs pointing towards mum's not very well. She started to get really bad in February, March time. It really ramped up, and she'd been going through a period of grief as well. So I'd say she'd not been looking after herself in the best way, because as we'll discuss in this, she was grieving. She was probably not eating right. The tablets that she was taking was on and off, but the tablets she was taking were like aspirin and these intense steroids and stuff that were all firing through her liver and her kidneys. And then when Grandad passed, she had like a period where we were just sitting around and sort of talking about old memories and stuff, and she'd have a few drinks at night and stuff. Because she kept breaking bones, she'd actually broken her ribs a few times, and she'd gone to the doctor and they said, "There's nothing we can do for ribs. You've got osteoporosis. It is what it is." What it seems now is with the tablets and drink and all these other things going on, she was actually getting worse with her autoimmune condition, and this was probably her liver saying, "I'm not doing too well." She went to the doctor and said, "What's going on? It seems worse than before." And she started to get ill. They said, "Oh, well, your liver's failing. Your kidneys aren't doing very well. We found another potential cancer scare." And from then, within 6 months, she'd passed away. So she passed away in the May. And then, just to quickly fast forward, as I've gone through that sort of period, in another year where it's not grief as such, but like my dad broke his wrist. It was his own fault. He was ice skating. He thought he was better than he was. But like, it's another family member that you're like, they're more brittle than we think, and God, it could just be gone like that. And then my girlfriend was in a car crash, and my uncle, who has struggled with mental health conditions his whole life, and to be quite frank here, with alcoholism as well. It's something that's really affected him. But he lost his mum, dad, and then his sister in the same way that I've lost grandparents and family. And his kidneys started to shut down and were firing stuff into his brain that now he needs to be in full-time care. So he's in a care home. So that year is, and that story actually goes to Grieving as well. He's not passed away, but he doesn't know day to day sort of who he is or what's transpired, or so we're kind of as a family grieving someone that's still alive. So there's that sort of grief as well. And then I started a new job in November. I took the summer off to try and grieve and get over everything. And there's no timeline to grieve for anyone that's listening. But I started a new job 2 days into that new job in November. My remaining granddad on this side of the family got ill. And within 2 weeks, he had passed because it was really aggressive cancer that we didn't know that he had. So that was another loss. So grief and I have become sort of good friends over the past year or so. Will, you've heard all this story before. I think the one that probably affects me the most is with grandparents. You kind of know that there's an end date for grandparents because they're the oldest in the family, and eventually one day they're not going to be there. With your mum and someone that's there constantly and has been there throughout your whole life, at 57 years old, you don't expect to be saying goodbye to your mum. And I think the hardest thing for me for that period, so granddad, I'd seen him on Christmas Day, but then I'd gone home. So I'd managed to say goodbye 2 days before. Grandma went into hospital and I didn't get to see her. Mum went into hospital on that Thursday before I went to New York, and she was adamant that I went to New York and everything was okay. And within 2 days, she completely spiraled. And I didn't see her get worse or pass away. So for me, there's a little bit of, I could walk into a room and she could still be there, and my brain would be like, yeah, that's a normal reaction. Whereas my brother and my dad were there when she got worse and passed. And I think for them, it's easier to accept that she's not here physically than it is for me to actually accept it, because I didn't see her get really bad and pass away. I saw her like, I'll see you Tuesday when I'm back. And then she'd gone. So I'm also grieving that sort of period of time where, have I had a real goodbye as well? Because I didn't know she was going to be gone as soon as she did. So yeah, there's a brief overview, Will, of my loss. I'm conscious I don't want it to become an episode purely about my grief, but I guess that's why I feel like I'm a little bit of an expert in this field over the past year or two. And to help people that are going through grief, whether it's one person, multiple people, the loss of a job, a relationship, like whatever that thing is that you've lost and that you're grieving, there's no right way to do it. There's no time limit. And me being an expert in it just means that I've suffered a lot of it all at once. I've got tips and I've got advice that I could discuss in this episode, but there's no right way to do it. And it's okay to accept that it's going to happen to everyone and it's going to be shit when it does.
Yeah, I mean, there's never a good time, is there? But as you said, it's going to happen to all of us. It's an inevitability. unfortunately. Just sort of talking about, briefly picking back up on what you said there about, you were in America, when your mum passed. And it's obviously a different type of grief that you're going through over, you say, your brother and your dad, because they were there. How do you, and it sounds like a horrible sort of way of phrasing it, and that's just my lack of English skills, but do you prefer how you went through that, in the sense that you didn't see your mum? Because obviously, as you said, you didn't get to say goodbye, so that's a massive thing, but you didn't see that decline. So in your mind's eye, your mum is healthy, for want of, a better way. Coupled with, obviously, your brother and your dad, who saw her decline, and obviously will have a very different image in their mind. I mean, I think if it was me, I think I would have, I would probably take your way. But I'm interested to know how your grief and your brother and your dad's, does that, have you noticed a difference when you're talking about it together, and, in your memories and things like that? Are they clouded a little more for them?
I definitely, I think so. And I know that my brother Ben is, he's 18, and he was there for mum passing, and we were both there for my granddad. So Granddad Roy, he passed in December. So for a family that loves Christmas, we've had too much death around Christmas. So that's not a great anniversary to have around there. But we were both in the room as he took his last breaths, but he was there for mum as well. And he's 18 years old, and that's not something that an 18-year-old should ever have to go through. Especially, like, I'm 31, it feels like I can stomach that a little bit more because I'm a little bit more wizened. I'm not that people get older and stuff, but like losing your mum when she's 57, when you're 18, and being in the room must be horrendous. And what was weird for me is I was in Central Park eating a bagel from Liberty Bagels. If anyone's in New York, great place, just on the side of Central Park. And we're sat on the rocks in there, and there's a little bit of symbolism and potentially some religious supernatural things we can tap into here for those that are of that of that opinion. But we were sat there in Central Park at about 10 a.m, so it's 3 p.m. UK time, the 5-hour difference, and I got a call from mum then saying, "I've just been told I'm going to die." And that was from me seeing her to now. I actually got a call from mum saying that, and that was the last time that I got to speak to her. She was fully responsive. She weirdly seemed at peace with it. In the past, she'd always been terrified of death, and it was something that that's why she struggled so much with losing my grandparents and her mum and dad, is because I think she always feared grief and feared death before it actually happened, and went through it. And as we've discussed in previous episodes, like, the best way to go through things is to go through them. And my what ifs and stuff don't actually help me. But when I go through the crisis or the thing, it's not nice, but you deal with it and you realize that you do survive and you get through. But there was this innate fear in her that she didn't want to die and she didn't want people to die. And there was just this horrible dark cloud over everyone's lives, because she knew that death was the end of that. But she seemed really at peace with it, which was comforting to me for someone that feared it so much. But Ben and Dad managed to get there. I said I was going to fly back. I wouldn't have made it back even if I'd have got a flight that minute, because she rapidly declined over that next few hours. But I was, in the middle of Central Park. And this is where it becomes like weird and people look for signs and stuff. And whether you use this to just get through hard times or grief, but I saw a dog running around in Central Park, and I'm an animal lover, but there was no one around. And for one of the biggest cities in the world, in a park that size, I looked around at that time and actually noticed, still, like, there's just a dog here and there's not another person around me in Central Park, and it's 10:30 in the morning. That was weird to me. And then this dog ran off and I followed it and I went, Jess, I'm going to go and see I can't take it home with me. I don't know what I'm going to do with this dog, but I don't want it to be alone. So I followed it and lost it. Couldn't find it. No person, no dog anywhere. There's just me and Jess in the center of Central Park. Not a person, right? Like, I can't reiterate how much there was just nothing. It was weird. It's like I Am Legend without the vampires. So I turned round and Jess was like, what's that by your foot? And Mum was really religious. I was raised Catholic, but I can't say I'm in the faith as such. I like to think that there's something, but I don't know what that is. But it's not a religion episode, so avoid that. But I was stood on something. Jess said, what's that? And Mum was very religious and she had crucifixes and she had faith. And I was stood on a little wooden cross that had been carved out. And again, I just picked up this wooden cross and looked around and there's no one around. There's just me, Jess, and a wooden cross. Minutes after I've just spoken to my mum, who has told me that she's going to pass. And the immense comfort that brought me was so weird because I couldn't be there. And it felt like someone, whether that's grandparents or whatever, or mum herself, this is a sign that she's going to be okay, regardless of what happens. It's going to be hard, but regardless of what it means to me, this little symbol is now going to be something that I keep with me until I pass, and I'll pass it down to my children, and hopefully they'll do the same, because it's one of the hardest times in my life hearing that from my mum, from her own mouth, that she's not going to be here very soon. To then get that is something that it's really helped me through. So it's weird how certain things can help like that. And then I suppose what is good as well is when I found out she had passed, I got a call after I just got off the tube at Fifth Avenue. And that's so outside of a normal life. If I was at home, I think I'd have broken down, I'd have hit the floor. But my 18-year-old brother telling me that Mum's passed now, when you climb out of a subway station on Fifth Avenue and look around, it feels like a movie. It does not feel like real life, because that's so far removed from what I'd normally be doing that I don't think I could process it. I told you, I was like, Mum's passed now. And I was holding on to this little wooden cross that I'd found that day. But I'm just looking around going, but this is surreal. Like, Saks Fifth Avenue's there, and like the Trump building's down there. And it's so weird. Ben and Dad are sat in Bolton Hospital, which if I was doing the same, I'd have probably been beside myself. So that helped, I think, with the initial processing of it, as this feels surreal, and allowed me to sort of gather myself to then start grieving properly. As soon as I got home, I went straight back home. As soon as I saw my dad, granddad, and my brother, I broke down immediately. And I think I needed that distance. And I think Mum knew, looking back at some of her symptoms and some of the discussions she was having with doctors that we were privy to, I think she knew she'd been told she was going to die sooner than we wanted to accept it. And I think there's part of her that saw this trip coming up and went, you go away and don't be here for this. I think she knew she was going to pass that sort of weekend. And she wanted to save me from that, because I had an opportunity to be saved from that. Don't know what that means for Ben, who's 18 and had to watch her pass, but maybe I'm just the favourite son, Ben, if you're listening along. But I doubt that's the case. I think she just probably knew that you were strong enough, and she wanted you there, and she wanted me to be across the world, not having to see that. But having seen my granddad pass, it's not something that makes it easier. I think what was good for us is the last words we said and the last words I said to Mum were over the phone saying I love you, but the last words that we said to Granddad, we were both holding his hand as he closed his eyes and went to sleep and passed. But our last words were I love you. We were holding his hand. There's not a nice way for someone to die. There's not a nice way for someone to pass away. But that's as good a passing as I can think, is surrounded by people that love you, holding your hand. So that was nice, but if I could never see a dead body again, then I'd prefer that, is I guess my takeaway from that, because it's not nice, but it's, as passings go, I'm glad that Ben and my dad were around, at least for Mum, and her best friend was there, Gillian, and my godmother, Julianne. They were all in that room with her, and I think that comforts the person that's there, but it also forges a bond between everyone else that's in that room that will then live on through through that grief as well. So yeah, that was pretty heavy going, that one. Will, have you got any nicer questions?
No, I just think that's, that point that you sort of talk about at the end there, that, you have that bond with people. It brings families, on the whole, I'd say it brings families closer together, and you can take time with each other, and, you look back and reflect on their life and celebrate it. And I think that's a really key point, that, you need that support network. Whether or not that is friends, family, work colleague, whoever, or someone at the end of a phone. I think people need that opportunity, if nothing else, just to talk about that person. It's I think talking about them, keeps their memory alive, don't they? There's that. I have no idea who said it, but I remember.
I was going to say. I was going to say the same.
Someone dies 3 times. Once when their physical body dies, once when you stop saying their name, and then finally once when you stop thinking about them. And there's absolutely no reason why those last 2, name and thinking about them, can't be continued for eons.
That's part of the basis of a great, I think it's a Pixar film rather than just Disney, but Coco. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't.
But it sort of focuses on the Day of the Dead, and how in I think it's a pretty, is it Mexican? Definitely Latin America. But they every year they'll sort of bring out photos and memories of these people, and the concept of that is they're obviously cartoon skeletons and stuff that when you remember them, they can come back from the other side. But if there's no one remembering them, they can't get through that barrier. And then if there's no one left on Earth to remember them, they start to disappear. And I think that was a really good way for kids to kind of understand that quote as well. And think about grief at a young age, because like I know people that have lost parents before they were even born. Like the mum and dad are having a child, and the dad could pass before the baby's even born. So you don't even know your dad. So how do you go about grieving someone that you never met? I think a lot of what we're talking about now is bereavement, because I've been through a lot of it, and that's where a lot of my grief comes from. But we've discussed off pod, and I think you touched it at the start of this episode, but grief is just the main quote that people use is grief is the price of love. But that doesn't need to be the love and loss of someone because of death. It can be the love of physical things, or careers, or houses, or a life that you thought you were going to live, or relationships. And I think what will be good in this episode is to touch on other types of grief, because it is just love and loss. And I think we touched on it in previous episodes. So, and it's probably good to throw it back your way now, is we talked about sort of grieving a life that you thought you were going to have when you went through diagnosis, and your life changes overnight, and you're coming out of hospital, and it's like, well, your job's not there anymore. Your house feels like you can't access it anymore. Even to the point where when you're buying houses, you have to give up on some things that you thought, I'd like that in my house, because you can't have that anymore. So like, it's not just the death of a person, it's the death of or the loss of a life that you thought you were going to have. So do you think, or now can you look back and think that you have grieved sort of the loss of the person that you thought you might have been when you were a child, or even young adult and stuff, to who you are now?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a great point. When we talked about doing this episode, you as you said, you've been through a horrible 18 months, 2 years. And I sort of, I'm 44 now. My parents are in their 70s. My grandparents have all passed, many years ago. So I've not really experienced, grief in the same level that you have. And I was sort of thinking, oh, well, I don't really know how much I'm going to be able to, contribute to this podcast other than sort of asking some probing questions of you. But then, you made the point that grief isn't about the physical loss. It's about loss of opportunities, and that's great because I think everybody can relate to that. Everybody has that point in their life that they can look back on and think, what if, if that hadn't happened, and the opportunities, and for me, it's weird because it's very much I think from my point of view, especially sort of focusing on the life that I was expecting to have, and then when that changed, I'm not going to say taken away from me because it wasn't, it just changed. I'm still here. I'm still living a good life, but
that's what I love about you just in general is like there's always that positive spin, is that it's not been taken away, it's changed, it's opened new opportunities. But yeah, like doesn't mean you can't grieve what you thought life was going to be like, and likewise for family and friends, they probably thought that they'd be living a life with a person that no longer exists, but I suppose what we'll come on to is that they live in life with a person that's got a different outlook on life.
Yeah, and mine wasn't sudden. When you're grieving a person, there is a time when that person is no longer with us, and that point, your life changes. And yeah, you might be able to prepare for that a little, but nothing ever, I think, prepares you for that ultimate point in time. But for me, I didn't have that ultimate point in time. I can't look back and say, right, it was on this day that my life changed. It's very much a process, and I think it's one that you don't appreciate when you're going through. Because as you said, I tended to have a positive outlook on this. It was always, I'm going to be better, or I'm going to get back to that life I had, and honestly, it's probably only been in the last, 10 years ago, probably now. I've been in the chair about 18 years, so it probably took sort of 7 or 8 years for me to suddenly realize that actually the life I now have is going to be my life that was going back. And it is, and it's that shock, and it kind of creeps up, and you start thinking back, and you start doing the what ifs, but at the same time, because there's no immediacy, there's no definite point when it changes, you've built up so many new things in your life that, for me anyway, it was just that, oh, okay, like this is it now. I've got a family, I've got a house, got a wife. My life has some direction again. Because before that, I was so focused on trying to get better, on trying to get that old life back. I going to rehab, trying to stand, trying to work on all that. And yeah, you kind of lose track of the other things in your life that are happening. They just happen, they're just a byproduct. My focus was, let's get better. And then, I think that probably if I had to try and pin it down to a time, would be, I had an appointment to a rehab. I'd not been for a while because, and I just waiting lists, etc. That and as I've said before in previous episodes, they're not set up for continued physiotherapy, continued treatment. And it was a new physiotherapist, and she was exceedingly blunt with me. She was very much you are not going to get better doing 2 weeks here every 6 months or whatever, and we just can't offer you anything more. So that's kind of, you are where you are type thing. And I guess that was probably the point, was like, okay, right. And
at the time, did you like that bluntness, or is it something you've come to appreciate in hindsight that you needed? At the time, was it a bit like, I want my life back, so don't tell me that stuff?
Yes.
And now it's that. Yeah.
Very much that it was like, I was quite upset. You can't be telling me this. I sort of went out and said to Fiona, like, I can't believe, she just said that to me, of course I'm going to get better. But now looking back, no, absolutely. It was that I needed to hear it, because she was absolutely right. It wasn't what I was trying to do was really half-arsing it, and I just, I didn't have the money for private physios, to be seeing them. There wasn't the resources to go on the NHS. So I really had to be sort of told, look, you need to refocus. And I always said, in those early years, that if I had £1 million, if I suddenly became a millionaire, I would pay for a private physio, and we work every day for as long as it takes to get me back. And now I'm like, no, not bothered. It doesn't bother me now. I have reached that acceptance.
That's something I was going to raise actually at this point, because you're great. The way that this podcast works is I do stuff when Will reminds me 18 times. Will does a lot of research and knows about what days are coming up and how people, and I turn up and talk about how crazy I am and how grief has affected me and all these sad stories and stupid anecdotes. Will does a lot of work in the background of research stuff, and you were talking about the stages of grief, and I've since Googled it myself, and it's the Kubler-Ross model. But you've just kind of gone through quite a few of those stages just in that one story, and it wasn't to do with death. It wasn't to do with bereavement. It was literally to do with the loss of what you were thinking. So I know that the 5 stages, and I know there's some that say 7 as well, but the 5 being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. You've sort of gone through that in that last 5-minute story of denying that you're ever going to get back to what you were. That anger when you were told that you're not going to be able to do this, and you're coming out of there and going, Fiona, she just said, I'm not doing this. I'm definitely I'm fuming that she's even had the goal to say that. The bargaining, if I become a millionaire, then I'll get it fixed and I can do all this. Going into depression and maybe finally realizing, oh, it's not going to happen. But I don't necessarily think you really found that depression, because what you underestimate, because you live through it and go through, but I can see, and hopefully the listeners and the viewers can see, is I don't think you realize how much mental strength you need to be as accepting and as understanding of your situation in the world as you are. Like, it seems easy for you to sit here and go, well, I just thought, well, yeah, it's going to change. And you got to acceptance pretty quickly, skipping over depression. But the amount of mental capacity and just understanding of the human psyche it takes to say, my life has changed, I'm never going to walk again, I'm never going to do this again, I'm never going to do that again, and go, but I can accept that I'm going to do this, and this is huge. And I think because you've lived through it now for as long as you have, I don't think you give yourself the credit for how just amazing that is. And it must be so inspiring to people that are at the start of their journeys as well, to know that you can get to a stage where you're just going, yeah, that was taken away from me, but look at what I've gained. So I will always give shout outs to you and your, the sheer inspiration of you just being able to accept the hand you've been dealt and just keep playing anyway. And
wow.
One thing I know is that you will never fold in a game of poker. There's no folding you. No matter if you're down to your last chip and the hand that you've been dealt is dirt, will never fold. And I think that's why I love doing this with you, because you're just so grounded, and that inspiration is huge. So there's the loving anyway. But with the episode,
I'm all going all red here. I mean, although I would like to say though that while I was never, I don't think really sort of went fully down the depression route, there was certainly some darker times. I mean, when we first got our own house, or flat as it was then, I don't think I really left the flat for the first 6 months. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want anyone to see me. I mean, it took us getting a dog. So
Yeah.
Fiona said, we're getting a dog because it gives you a reason to go outside at least 3 times a day or whatever, to take this dog just wandering around the communal gardens where our flat was. And there was this awful time where I really thought, well, I'm pretty useless. I can't do anything. I'm not going to be able to contribute to do anything. I was still quite weak in terms of arm and strength and upper body strength. I mean, I'm not great now, but I was much worse then. I had I couldn't bend over and pick anything up off the floor. I had one of those litter picker grabber things that I would use if I dropped some paper or whatever on the floor to pick it up. I was really not sort of great in terms of what I was able to do or not do. And there was some, I said, there was some pretty horrible times, and I wasn't thinking particularly clearly. I remember doing one of those online depression forms, where we can get a score or whatever, and it coming back that I was mildly depressed, and that was a real sort of kick up the arse to me that I needed to try and find something, and it was a simple thing, as I mentioned on the previous episode, the 2012 Paralympics. It was just sort of a simple thing of just finding a sports club, just trying something, getting out the house, and just seeing other people. I mean, not necessarily people with disabilities, just other people, just interacting with people. And I had to push myself to do it. It was very easy for me to sort of go to a session and then go, oh, I don't want to go back again. I'm not very good at it and what have you. But you kind of just, you kind of just have to push yourself. And
that's the thing with depression. You find when you fill out those forms is it discusses stuff like you don't have to be just crying all the time or wallowing. It could be, do you find joy in things that you used to? And I guess for you, there's things that were taken away that you can't find joy in them because you can't do them anymore. But even if it's reading or watching sport or something, if you're just sat there absently watching it, you don't realize that that's a form of depression as well. Like if you're not actually enjoying what you used to, that's a sign that things aren't okay on the mental side of things. And I think that's what I mean when I say like your outlook on stuff and being able to change things around and do what actually would be beneficial to you. It's hard, especially throughout periods of depression, because it's easy to say, well, you're depressed, go out with friends, go to a sports club, go and walk a dog. But like, you'll have gone through this as well. There's times where I'm just not doing that because I don't have the capacity to do that. And it's not because I'm anxious about it, it's because I just feel so low that what's the point? It's like that hopelessness. And as you said, it's easy to go to one session and go, well, I tried it, and then just give up. The hardest thing about, I think, getting through depression is starting to do those things again that will make you feel better, because it is something that saps everything else out of you and just makes you just find yourself sat in a room and 2 weeks, 3 months, a year has passed and you're still sat in the same room looking at the same walls going, yeah, time's passing and I'm just kind of part of the furniture now.
So it's we all obviously have our own different approaches to it. How we go about it. I mean, how's Ben? Compared to you, is he still obviously heavily processing it, or has you been an advantage for him in that he's able to sort of deal with it in slightly better way? Or
I think we've got, because we are such a small family, we've got quite a close knit. I mean, there's me, Ben, and Dad really on this side left, and it's. Yeah, it's been hard, but I think for Ben's weird. He has and he'll be listening to this down, but he has sort of like a day or two where he's heartbroken and there's no getting over it, and then there's like a switch and he's going, right, well, life's going to go on and they'd want me to. Whereas I think I was a bit at the start of trying to be there for everyone else, and then I've kind of suffered that a little bit further down the line. And I think with those stages of grief, it's hard with denial, because especially with bereavement, because you can't deny that someone's not there anymore. It's hard to say they're not. I don't think denial is shown in the fact that, like, oh well, I'm denying that they're dead, because they're not here anymore. They're physically, yeah. There's no denying that. But sort of the anger that could I have done anything? I'm annoyed that you've left us. Blah blah blah. The bargaining. What could we have done? The depression that comes with that, and acceptance. Going through those stages, because I lost so many people in such a short space of time. I think, like with my grandma, was probably through most of the stages, but then granddad dies 2 days after Christmas, and you start again. Within that 6 months, you're going through that, and your mum passes. You're at different, and then 6 months later, another granddad passes. You're at different stages of grief for different people. They all blend into one, and it's quite hard to know where you are. But I think me and Ben are really close, and there's 12 years between us. And I think I've said before, I'm sort of outside of Dad, who's a huge support to both of us in life. Because I'm over in Leeds now, I'm almost like an extension of Dad now, where I'm quite paternal for Ben, and I think he still sort of has that parental love from me on this side, even though we're brothers and we do brotherly things and we'll fight like brothers. There's that side where I'm trying to do all I can to protect him from going through this. But likewise, someone that's 18 who has seen 2 people pass away, he's that rock for me as well. So I think there's balance there, where we both, when we need it, we've got that anchor. And I've got a great support group with friends and family and stuff, and Jess and you, and knowing that I can talk about it. And I think one of the key things that I've learned from grief is that, and I'm actually starting to try and do a bit of work in the grief space, because I feel like I've got a lot of advice to give, especially around bereavement. Like we've talked about it, but you don't know how much admin there is involved in someone passing away. You don't know how much funerals are going to cost, and all these different forms that you have to fill out and stuff. So you can't actually grieve someone passing until, like, bank accounts are cleared and the house is sold, and there's all these other things that you're going through before you can even start those 5 stages of grief. Because all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we know that you've got something going on, but we need to fill out all these forms and all this legal stuff, and that's difficult as well. But I think having people around and talking about it, as you've said, like talking about lives that you've lost or jobs that you've lost or whatever it is, can stop you from spiraling and going into this long-term grief thing. But knowing that it's personal to you, and it doesn't matter if you've lost a grandparent, a parent, a partner, or a pet. Like, it's all relative to the person that you've lost. And it could be that someone's going through losing their mum or dad, and you've lost an opportunity at a job you've got. It doesn't make your grief any less valid, and you should be able to feel all your feelings. And I'm a big advocate for whatever you need to go through, and then you'll grow through that. One thing that you mentioned as well, and I think because we've talked about Ben being 18, but you've told me a few times about your son losing a friend at school when he was very young. How did you see stages of grief for a really young child?
Yeah, that was strange. So my son was, I think he was 4 at the time, and he just started at nursery. They'd been there. He'd been there 6 months, I think, and because he was younger, the group of children he originally went with moved up to the next year, and he stayed in reception. But he'd made a really good friend there. We'd always talk about him when he came home, and went to birthday parties and things like that. And and then we found out that unfortunately he'd got an illness and died over a weekend. And we got some information sent from school about it, and specifically about talking to young children about it. And now before that we had pets that we'd put down and who had been ill, and we'd actually got this great book. I don't know if you're if you remember this series, this cat called Mog.
Yeah.
I think everyone had the Mog book when they were little. Well, there was actually another book about Mog where Mog dies, horribly upsetting, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's not one I want to know exists. I just
yeah. No, I mean, oh, tears stream down your face.
but I imagine you'll get to this, but I guess that the benefit of that book is that it will teach kids about something that they are going to go through.
Absolutely, yeah. So when our pets had died, we sat down with them, and we'd read through this book, and it about explains all about what got ill and type thing, and off she went up to the clouds. So that became our sort of go-to thing, was they're in the clouds. So we got this advice, and it was very much. One thing that kind of surprised me really was how it said you must be direct about the news. You can't say that they've gone to sleep forever, or they've gone away, because for a 4-year-old, well, that could either terrify them about going to sleep because they might not wake up, or what if they've gone away? They'll come back. So it was very much, you've got to be very, very clear to them about it, that they aren't coming back. They have died. They have passed away. They are not coming back. And the thing with young kids is that, yes, they go through, some of these stages. I've not seen Teddy go through all of them, but he's definitely had some of them. But they don't do it. It's very sporadic, and so we told him, for example, his friend had died. And he was like, "Oh, is he in the clouds now?" And yes, he's not coming back. Unfortunately, he got very ill. And I was like, "Oh, well, that's sad. What's to see?" And it very much that's not him not caring. That's just how a 4-year-old thinks. Their mind's going a million miles an hour. And 2 days later, he'll come and say, "I'm really sad. That he's not here anymore. I really liked him." And so you'll get those kind of conversations cropping up, and they probably got them over the course of a month or two. He'd come back and, told us he was sad, and, it's okay, and we talked about it. But it would only ever last a few minutes, and that's very much typical of how young kids, process this, that they do accept it. But, and they said, everyone's grief is different. Young kids especially grieve isn't very focused. It is all over the place. But that doesn't mean that they're not feeling it. And, Teddy has definitely been through, we've seen some denial for it. Oh, well, I'm sure he'll be back. And, you have to reiterate again that he's dead and he's not coming back. But then you see, sort of that acceptance that he talks about him in the past tense, but in a great way, and how much fun they had, and and then he talks about his new friends, and and there's that sort of, he's always going to have that with him. I think, if you ask him about it, he'll always tell you about his friends. And school were really great about it. They made a nice little memorial corner, and they had people come in and talk to them as well. So, there was really good support system there. And, and all you can do as parents is just help out and, make sure you're there. But yeah, he's gone through probably more grief, in terms of personal loss, for someone than I have. So it was very strange for me doing this, because I couldn't really sort of relate to it too much, or say all you can do is be there and let them talk about it. I think is the important, and that probably goes for everybody as well. It's an uncomfortable subject, is talking about grief and loss. I mean, not just because it's quite a hard subject to talk about, but we're all we're quite British and reserved about a lot of things, and having someone get upset or talk about these things with you isn't a topic really that you necessarily want to have with people. It's quite a whole, it's easier to just talk about the news, the weather, sport, whatever, something bit, lighthearted or whatever. But actually, you've got to afford people the opportunity to talk about these things. Because, that's when we see problems, you bottle it up, and, things manifest in different ways. You've got to give people the opportunity to talk about their grief, And as hard as it is for you, I guarantee it's much harder for the person who's going through that process. So if there is somebody in your life at the moment who is suffering from bereavement or loss, then talk to them about it. Go around for a cup of tea, take them out for a drink or something, but just make sure. I mean, maybe that they don't want to talk about it, which is fine as well. But it's opportunity. You've got to afford them the opportunity to talk about it if they want, and know that it's okay to talk about it with you, and that you're not going to judge them. You're not going to get upset with them for bringing up, oh, what do you mean you talk about this? Happened months ago. Why are you still talking about it? That kind of attitude doesn't help. You just have to be able to let people.
Well, grief comes in waves as well. Like, there's times where, even last week, like, I got really upset, and I didn't think I would, but it was a year since Mum had passed. And I thought it would just pass another day, but with people remembering her and stuff, it drags it all up again. But it's not. I think there's a few conversations to have. There's sometimes where you want to talk about the actual loss and the moment that it happened, and whether that's loss of anything, the actual catalyst of, this is why I'm grieving, because this person died, or we lost this, or I broke up with this person, or we had to put our pet down. But there's other times where the grief chat is actually talking about the person for who they were and what they would have thought about something that's happening live in that moment. It's not about their death or anything. It's talking about them as though they existed. And I know that I've got some close friends who lost their daughter at 14 hours old. And one of the things that they told me at the start, and what they want everyone to do, is keep saying her name, keep talking about it, because she existed. I don't want people to pretend that these people didn't exist, or that they weren't alive, regardless of how long you're here for. To someone, they are the most important person, and you avoiding talking about them almost makes it feel like it's not allowed to be talked about, which is why people don't talk about grief, because they think it's a negative thing, or people have got their own things going on. But the more people talk about it, the more other people will talk about it. And I think probably the way to end this grief chat, rather than being about the sadness of bereavement, is the old quote of that grief is the price of love. People often say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, or and you can acknowledge that they're trying to say the right thing, and they're trying to support, and that's a nice thing. But there's some days where I'm like, well, I'm not sorry, because I felt as bad as I did, and I feel lost now. Like, when I go through big things, like when I have my first child, or I'm getting married, or my mum's not going to be there, and they're not going to know her outside of memories that other people have got. So I need to talk about her all the time. I need to tell people what she was like. But I'm grieving every time that I mention her, because that love that comes up is something that I'm gonna grieve forever. And there's a great video, I don't know if you've seen it, Will, and we'll probably post it on social, but Andrew Garfield, the actor, talking about losing his mum, and he gets really upset, and he says, I don't want my sadness to be like that I'm upset at the loss as such. It's just, this is all the love that I would have given her coming out as tears and grief, because it's all built up inside me, and that's not going to go anywhere. But I can't give it to her now, so it's going to come out in memories and tears. And I think that's such a beautiful way of looking at it. And yeah, I think the key is I'm glad that I'm suffering grief, because it means that I've experienced love to the highest order, and I've had people and things in my life that I'm sad to have lost. And I think people that don't have that are probably, well, no, they are in a worse position than I am, and they'll feel worse than I do, because I know that I'm grieving people that I've been so privileged and so blessed to have in my life, that it's actually when you can get through grief to that acceptance stage, as I think we have with a lot of what we've talked about. And there's times where I'll go back in my grief and try and bargain and what could I have done and stuff. But I know that the people I've lost aren't coming back. But I also know that I feel, or I felt as bad as I do, because there was so much love there, and those memories are not going anywhere. And I can remember them and talk about them for the rest of my life. And they will never die, because I will never stop thinking or talking about them, as per that quote. So I think just allowing people the space to do that is is key. But yeah, just highlighting that grief exists because love exists. And if grief is the worst emotion in the world, or one of, love is the complete opposite, and that's the best. So yeah, I try and frame it in that way.
No, it's amazing, and you're absolutely right. If it only hurts, doesn't it? Because of the love that you had. If you didn't care, life would be easy. If you didn't care about anything, you'd have no emotions either way. But I think as well, something that we talked about off pod, but is that when you're grieving loss of an opportunity or a life that you once had, that it inevitably brings other opportunities. Your life goes in a direction that you would never have done had you continued with that previous life. So for me, for example, had I not been ill and gone in the chair, I would be working, 45, 50 hours a week, being a solicitor. I'd probably have kids, but, I wouldn't be able to do some of the things I do with them because I'd be working so much. And, for me, the big one as well is when I talked about earlier about how I was looking for opportunities to get out and try and do something, I got in touch with a local American football organization, this was 10 years ago now, and went down there on Saturday mornings for, a year or so and helped out there, and gradually that built up. I met more people, started kids teams, met more people, and inevitably found my way to you, Danny, when you came over, and playing for the adult team here in Leeds, and you come over and started helping out the university team here, and that's how we met and became friends. And I've got other friends as well who I'm, good friends with, and I have met them through Omega Football. And here I am now doing this with you, and I guarantee none of that would have happened, because if I was working 50-hour weeks or whatever, I wouldn't have volunteered to do anything on a Saturday morning, because I'd have wanted my rest and, a chance to just do anything at the weekend. I wouldn't be doing half the things I'm doing now, and that gave me the confidence then that, for my kids, other sports that they do, for their rugby, for their football, I volunteered to help out with them because I know I can now because of the confidence I got to make football. And again, probably none of this would have happened, at all, had I not had, this unfortunate illness and trauma back in 2007. So yeah, absolutely, grief and that grieving for what you had is absolutely something that, you need to process. But, that the positive is something will come out of it good, and something unforeseen will come out of it. And
well, it's those, you can go one of two ways, can't you? You can either go, like, I take my mum as that's the biggest loss. And as much as my dad loves me and Jess loves me and my brother loves me and friends do, I think that your mum carries you for 9 months and gives birth to you. There's no love on this earth like a mother's love. So I've lost the one person that loves me unconditionally more than anyone ever can and ever would. That's going to be one of the most profound losses of my life. And then you can either think, she was 57, that's less than half my life again. What's the point? What's the point of getting up tomorrow and trying things and knowing that it can be over like that? Or you can reframe that, which is how I've managed to with her advice that I can look back on and friends and family and go, if I get half my life again, I'll have outlived my mum, and it could be over like that. So let's go out there and do everything we can to live with what we've got. And it is the hand you've been dealt, and everyone's got different things going on and stuff. And there'll be days where I can't do that and I won't have that mindset. But trying to reframe it into life is short, so let's live it. And I know it sounds quite twee and quite like most influencers will say on TikTok, but it is the key. All we've got is a life to live and love to give. So we just need to keep doing that. And I think one thing I'd like to finish on is a quote that my mum left in a book for me that I got after she'd passed. I got her a Dear Mum book where it says, like, what do you remember as a child? And so you can read their story. And this is something I found after she passed, actually, and she was filling it out still in hospital with shaky handwriting and stuff, which was heartbreaking until I got to this one page, and she'd skipped loads of other pages to get to this one. And it was, what piece of advice would you like to offer me? And I posted it on the year anniversary of her death, but she wrote, don't dwell on things, enjoy life, be who you want to be, don't live in the past, forgive quickly, and love easily. And if there's one thing that I'm going to take from my mum's life and the lessons she's taught me, it's going to be that. And if anyone else can take away from this podcast all that grief and everything that they're going to go through, just those few words, and live as mum would have wanted me to, wants me to, I think the world would be a much happier place, regardless of how much grief you go through, because the opposite of that is love, and they go hand in hand, and love will always exist for those that, it's that help will always exist to those at Hogwarts that ask for it. It's the same as love will always exist for those that are grieving. So yeah, I think that's a nice way to finish. As you can probably tell from my demeanor and smiliness for those watching the video, I'm not happy that I've had to go through this, but it is an inevitability, and I'm happy that I've experienced enough love that I've grieved as much as I have, because without love, there is no grief, and vice versa. So that's my look on it.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a great way to end. So thank you for listening. So appreciate it. Been tough episode. And there are support numbers out there. We will put them in our description for this pod. So, if you need someone to talk to, there are people out there. And if you're really desperate for people to talk to, you can always drop us a message. We're always here for a chat anytime. So thank you for listening again, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.